Hi, welcome to the regular meeting of the Brisbane Planning Commission, Thursday, April 28th, 2016, 7:30 p.m., Brisbane City Hall. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Present.
Commissioner Doe,
Present.
Commissioner Manier, Commissioner Parker,
Here.
Commissioner Reinhardt.
Here.
Okay. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda, please?
I'll make a motion to adopt tonight's agenda.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Before we move on to the consent calendar, we wanted to remind everyone that items listed as consent calendar items are considered routine and will be acted upon collectively by one motion adopting the Planning Department's recommendation unless a member of the public, the Commission, or its staff asks to remove an item to discuss it. Prior to the motion, the chairperson will ask if anyone wishes to remove an item from the consent calendar. Does anyone wish to remove an item?
No.
No? Okay. So, could we have a motion to adopt the consent calendar as presented?
I'll make a motion to adopt the consent calendar, including the approval of draft action minutes from the meetings of March 10th and March 24th.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So,
I am recusing myself from the March 10th because I wasn't here.
in terms of written communication, oral communications first. Does anyone in the audience want to address the commission on any items not on the agenda tonight? No? Okay, so we'll move on to written communications. I have here an invitation to the Housing Leadership Council, Affordable Housing Week, May 6th through 14. An invitation to the Housing Endowment and Regional Trust of San Mateo County Donor Recognition Day. A letter from the County of San Mateo on behalf of HEART. Let's see. And I think these are all related to the item on the agenda, so I'll mention it, but we can talk more further later. It is from Joe Diaz, Planning Commission letter in terms of the fiscal analysis report. An email from Claire Johnson in terms of the consideration of the fiscal and economic considerations. And also a letter from Greenbelt Alliance, RE, conditional endorsement of the DSP for the Brisbane Baylands. Any other written communications we'd like to share? Okay, I think that's it. So on to old business.
Did you receive this?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't hear that.
Yep, that was
Okay.
the HEART letter.
Oh, okay.
The county. On to old business. Baylands planning applications, Baylands concept plans, Brisbane Baylands specific plan, general plan amendment case GP-01-06, and related final environmental impact report. Universal Paragon Corporation is the applicant. Owners are various. APN is various.
Let's go ahead and turn the presentation over to Lloyd Zola.
Hi.
Hi.
Good to be back. Welcome back.
Good to be back.
And tonight will be a little bit different than other ones because we're going to be talking some very specific things about the land uses you've discussed and what ought to go where and how pieces start fitting together on the Baylands. And the question for this evening is how should land uses be distributed within the Baylands? So we've talked about what land uses might be appropriate somewhere, and now we'll start talking about what goes where. And this is also the discussion, and we'll go through this tonight, that you've asked the question, how do we work our way through all those scenarios and the renewable energy plan and come up with a recommendation? That will be the discussion that we'll have tonight, and we have a structured way of doing that. And just by way of reminder, you've previously addressed basic principles for Baylands development and the land uses that would be appropriate. And what we'll do tonight is work through what are the key features that show up in your basic principles, the EIR, some of the public discussion you had in the public hearings, and as those are preserved or recognized on the site within the Baylands, potential development areas really can be defined, and you'll see the derivation of how those come about. And then we can discuss, once we get to what are the areas that we discuss land use for, what are the most appropriate area uses for each of those areas on the site, whether it be some form of development or some form of open space. And the caveat I've given at each meeting, we'll do again tonight, any decisions you make tonight are preliminary. And until you actually make your final recommendation, you can go back and redo them. And so what we're doing tonight is working our way towards putting together a draft recommendation that the public can comment on at a public hearing and you can then review. So the basic principles, and I picked out the ones that are relevant to distribution of land uses, and you'll see how these play out on the site as we go. One is that the preservation of large unbroken blocks of open space, restoration of wetlands, and flow and continuity of open space, protecting habitat areas, restoring the roundhouse, and looking at potential for rail and educational uses at the roundhouse, but maintaining compatible uses adjacent to the roundhouse, transit orientation for development, and connectivity to the Bayshore Caltrain station. And this is really not having to do with the distribution of open spaces, but just a reminder for the commission and the public. Any discussion of what land uses might be appropriate where are based on ensuring, that all the discussion we've had about remediation, that the site is safe for whatever uses we talk about tonight. The key features that I'll run through, and we'll show you how these map out. One are the existing land uses on the site, the roundhouse, areas for the protection of environmental resources, extending the Geneva Avenue to the new Candlestick Interchange, the Caltrain line, which runs north-south through the site, potential alignment for Lagoon Road, and the transit orientation. So now I'll show you what these look like on maps. One of the key features, starting with existing land uses, Recology, Kinder Morgan, and the machinery and equipment building. These are uses that are on the site today and presumably will stay, as well as the roundhouse that then will be restored, and we'll look at land uses surrounding the roundhouse. In terms of environmental protection, the lagoon, as well as areas adjacent to the lagoon, basically the triangular area formed by Lagoon Road, Tunnel, and Bayshore, as well as the 101 freeway. So it's not, when we say the lagoon, it's also the adjacent areas part of open space. Icehouse Hill, Visitation Creek, and then daylighting it to become a habitat restoration area through the center portion of the site. The Geneva Avenue extension, a 6-lane roadway that will have parking during non-peak hours, and also the Candlestick Interchange. And one of the things that's important about the Candlestick Interchange is the Bi-County program is looking at making that a full interchange, on and off ramps, northbound and southbound. So you would be able to get off at Candlestick from any direction, get on at Candlestick Interchange going in any direction, and would be connected to that interchange via Geneva as opposed to the roundabout route that you have now. The Caltrain line, which splits the site north and south. So we'll talk about areas west of Caltrain, east of Caltrain. And then potential for realignment of Lagoon Road. And this realignment, what it does are a couple things. One, it would push Lagoon Road farther north. And so it would push farther north, get a bigger buffer area between development to the north or whatever happens to the north and the lagoon, as well as get a more direct route from central Brisbane to the existing interchange that's now just north of Lagoon Road. And so the idea is you'd be able to actually cross over Tunnel and just stay on that street and end up right at the interchange, the southbound off-ramp, southbound on-ramp. Because one of the things that was mentioned is better access to that and tying the connection better. Transit orientation defined as a half-mile radius from the Caltrain station, Bayshore station, and so that crosshatched area at the north is what is within a half mile of the Bayshore station, assuming that it is where it is now or slightly to the south and not moved way up into San Francisco. And then potential open space connectivity, and this has come up in a couple different ways. So if you look at the area immediately north of Lagoon Road, you'll see a wide swath of green crosshatch area. That is an open space area shown in the developer-sponsored plan that is connectivity between the Lagoon Road north up to the creek in that plan with development on both sides. And then you'll see along the freeway an area identified as a potential shoreline setback, which is part of the Dangerman open space plan that was done several years ago, is carried forward in the CPP scenarios, the open or the renewable energy generation scenario, and was one of the things also that the windsurfers had talked about getting development set back from the shoreline. So when you put all of those together, what I found is when you take all that list of features, 6 areas pop out. And you can conceive of these 6 areas as the area north of Geneva, west of Caltrain, and east of Caltrain, the area between Geneva and that central drainage area, west of Caltrain, east of Caltrain, the area south of the channel, west of Caltrain, which would consist of the existing industrial area, those uses, as well as the southerly portion of the landfill. And so as we look at what areas should you to start looking at for what uses ought to go where, the way these features work is you end up with 6 areas really to contemplate and discuss. The other thing that I found is when I looked at that map and compared it to all of the scenarios and the renewable energy generation alternative, every one of them are based on those 6 different building blocks. That they look at the divisions of Geneva, the Central Channel, as well as the Caltrain line. All of those alternatives and scenarios, as different as they all look from each other because of the detailed land uses, all are based on those same 6 building blocks. And recognize that the bubbles in here are conceptual, and there'll be some different alignments, and what I'll show you in a second, to where Geneva goes, as well as that central drainage. But this is what those 6 areas look like compared to each of the, or this is what they look like compared to each of the scenarios. So in the DSP scenario, you see based around the same 6 areas. Slight variations on the location of the channel connection and some of the open space. The DSP variant, same basic 6 areas. The CPP scenario, different location to push Geneva south, modify those bubbles to meet the central channel and Geneva, same basic 6 areas. The same in the recology scenario. And in the CPP scenarios, you'll see that the 2 areas south of the creek, the existing industrial park, the southerly portion of the landfill, are both proposed to remain in or to be in open space as opposed to some kind of development. But what's the important part here is it's the same 6 building blocks, some slightly different configurations. And then you look at the renewable energy generation scenario or alternative, and essentially the same 6 building blocks. In this case, southerly areas designated for open space, and in the central area for renewable energy generation and some open space. So put together, what this led me to is being able to structure the discussion, because I know some of you have, how do we look at all these alternatives and scenarios and start dealing with them? But think in terms of these 6 areas. And I'll show you for each of the 6 areas what each of the alternatives and scenarios propose for them. But before I do that, as you look at land uses, I'll give you one other thing to look at. The last couple of meetings you talked about land uses. And in the left-hand column, besides open space, we've discussed retail, office, hotels, residential, light industrial R&D, recology, renewable energy generation, and commercial recreation as potential land uses that might be appropriate somewhere. So all of those are, I'm calling them single use types. They're specific uses. You can combine them, if you want, into more general categories. So one example would be if you have one of those 6 areas that you think some mix of retail and office and hotels would be appropriate, but as a commissioner or as a commission, I don't really want to look at where's the office compared to where's the retail, compared to where's the hotel. But I think that mix might be appropriate for an area. You could call it commercial office. If you looked at another way of combining uses and generalizing the land use, a mix of retail, office, hotels, residential, such as are proposed in the DSP plan in some areas, rather than saying this area shall be reserved for residential use, you could say within this area, residential is one of the uses that could be appropriate as part of a mixed-use development under the same issues, same circumstances and provisos that you laid out when we discussed residential. Safety in terms of remediation, traffic, and so on. You could look at a combination of retail, office, and light industrial, such as occurs in some of the plans. Simply call it business park and not have to say the industrial goes here, the retail goes there, and the offices go there. So you can generalize a single title for one of these areas and then have a specific plan come back to lay out the street system and specific uses, as Commissioner Meir had talked about, starting at the general plan level and then working into more detail. You could look at, as I just said, the business park, or something that might be called industrial park, which would be a combination of recology and light industrial. So you wouldn't even have to, you could call an area light industrial or industrial park. That would be that kind of combination. Or any other kinds of combinations. If you say, I could see this area being a mix of A, B, C, and D, you don't have to lay out details of this goes exactly here and that goes exactly where. That's what the later specific plan would follow from a concept plan. So I'll run through the 6 areas and start and show you a little bit about what is proposed. So if we start in the northeast corner of the site, clockwise, I put 1 where the 1 on the clock ought to be. Could have really started anywhere, but in that area north of Geneva, east of the Caltrain line, the DSP scenarios show business park, a mix of retail, office, and hotel. The CPP scenarios identify hotel, recology, and R&D. So hotel and R&D in the area between recology and Geneva. In the recology variant, that whole block is shown as recology. One of the things that when you talked about recology before, had talked about maintaining the potential for the expansion without necessarily saying all of that will be recology. In the next area, basically the east, the northerly part of the landfill east of Caltrain between Geneva and the Channel, the DSP scenarios have a mix of office and retail, call that business park. In the CPP scenarios, you have a combination of commercial office, civic uses, and open space, particularly to the east and south. And then the renewable energy alternative calls that area renewable energy. So as you go through these areas, this is how you can actually mix and match different things from different plans, or if you agree with one of them, you just can build the land uses that way. The area south of the Channel, east of Kinder Morgan, east of the Caltrain line, the DSP scenarios call that a combination of business park and that central open space spine. The CPP scenarios and renewable energy scenarios show that entire block as open space. Area 4 being the existing industrial park between Bayshore and where the extension of the Daylighted Creek would be. That is shown as business park in the DSP scenarios, and the CPP scenarios and renewable energy maintain that as open space, essentially removing the existing business park And in those scenarios, development south of the channel would all be retained in open space.
Can I ask a question
Yeah.
about this? So the existing DSP, I'm sorry, the existing general plan stipulates that all of the lagoon front property is 100% open space. So is that the area strictly that you have labeled there, Lagoon Road, below the new?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so the open space area in the general plan that says the lagoon shall be there,
Right, that's-
I've defined as that triangular area between Lagoon Way, Freeway, and the western boundary of the Baylands.
Okay, great.
No, okay. Go back and say that again.
Okay, the triangular area at the south defined by Lagoon Road, the 101 Freeway, and the western boundary of the Baylands, that triangular area is always shown as lagoon and open space. So that was not one of the choices.
Right.
As you have said, that,
I just wanted to make sure that the area north of the new alignment was not currently included, so it wouldn't take a change of the general plan to
Correct.
that area.
right. And what would actually happen is if Lagoon Road is realigned north, is the area south of Lagoon Road would then be subject to that same policy,
Okay, so it's defined as Lagoon Road wherever Lagoon Road is.
wherever Lagoon Road is.
Okay.
And there are environmental mitigation measures, so you may not move it south, so you can't reduce it.
Right.
Yeah, so that's consistent throughout.
And how big is that area that, like, is pretty much going perpendicular to the existing ramp, right? The new road.
Yeah. The new road I can't remember how many acres it adds, moving it north, because there is not a precise alignment for that, but it would add, I looked at the size of the planning areas and not the lagoon area, so I can't give you that number. I can come back with
So the additional area will be again designated as open space.
exactly.
Subtracting the road.
Yeah, the area south of Lagoon is open space.
Okay.
Yeah, your existing policy and EIR mitigation measures basically say those land use types of development areas do not occur adjacent to Lagoon, and Lagoon is always defined as Lagoon Road.
Okay.
Area 5, which is south of Geneva, west of Caltrain, in this area, in the DSP scenarios, this is where residential starts getting introduced along with offices and retail. So that could be generalized to call it mixed use. And so you would not, if the idea of some residential potentially at some density, and we'll talk about intensity at your next meeting, how many units, if residential is part of it, how much development will be your next discussion. You do not have to start identifying what exactly goes where adjacent to the roundhouse, but think generally about the kinds of uses that would be appropriate adjacent to the roundhouse. In the CPP scenarios, that area number 5 is shown as a combination of hotels, civic, and open space to the south. As well, the renewable energy alternative calls that area a combination of R&D along the Geneva extension and then open space to the south. And area 6, adjacent to the Bayshore Caltrain station, so north of Geneva on the west side of the rail, that is also in the DSP scenarios shown as mixed use. It's a combination of office, retail, and residential. The CPP scenarios show that as commercial office, a mix of retail and office, whereas the renewable energy scenario has a retail area and R&D. So the idea of this is to lay out, you can look at area by area, which scenario shows what. And I think, my suggestion is just because these building blocks are so consistent between all the scenarios, it makes, for me, explaining it a lot easier because I didn't have to figure out how you look at different building blocks and compare the scenarios. So I also have a table that shows all of this together, but if you want to compare one scenario, all the areas, or one area, what the different scenarios show. So with that, if there's any questions, I'd be glad to take them. Otherwise, my suggestion would be to start with Area 1 and just discuss from everything you've heard so far, your basic principles that you've outlined, what would be the appropriate land uses area by area. I know that was a lot. Does it make sense to you?
Yes.
That's the question I ought to ask.
Yes, makes sense.
Great.
Okay, we'll take you through them one by one, and we can deal with questions as we go.
Yeah, I do have a question related to Area 1. I have heard some people talk about a land swap between Recology and UPC, and I understand that that might not be terribly amenable to the applicant. I'm wondering,
I thought the applicant mentioned that at one of the meetings.
did he? So I'm just
Yeah.
wondering,
It's,
do we have a notion of where Recology could go that's not its current location? And
I
Is it
think he
worth
was talking
discussing?
about the expansion of Recology. The expansion maybe could be swapped out.
Yeah, my recollection of what the applicant, UPC, was saying is he noted that was discussed. He was not saying it ought to happen, he wasn't agreeing, but he was
Right.
recognizing that was going on. I'll lay out a couple considerations. And John is over there, and the attorney is over there, and they'll stop me if I go too far. One is the question for me as a planner and looking at the environmental is UPC's application the venue to discuss where Recology ought to be? Because Recology's application is not in front of you right now.
right.
And so to say, for example, Recology must move somewhere else and say Recology will go here, even if you found an appropriate place, signals before you even have heard the case, no, we're not going to approve their expansion there. So while you can talk about, I think, the general plan, and one of the things we did talk about in relation to Recology is the need to make them a better neighbor and deal with existing things. We could even talk about the potential for a move south, but my suggestion to you for tonight is this isn't really a good venue to say they have to move. And
Besides,
Or-
they own the land.
Well, it just,
yeah, they don't own the land, and just from a business standpoint, you're telling you would be telling Recology you have to go buy that land from UPC.
right.
So what does that do to willing buyer, willing seller, or telling UPC your only use of that land is to sell it to Recology? And my suggestion to you is, if that is something you want to look at, you think about land uses in that area and what might be appropriate, and not preclude that in the future. But I would think this is not the venue to say they must move.
Right. I was just thinking that if they don't have a reasonable place to move to, then there's little point in putting a lot of discussion on what's going to go there other than Recology, because they're not going to shut down, and
Yeah.
would have to have somewhere to go in order to have something else there.
My understanding of sitting in 2-3 Recology meetings is that they're going to have, what they want are 3 buildings. They want to take this and put it into buildings. And one of the buildings would be recycling, one would be green, and one would be the black. And therefore try to be better neighbors that way. And I think there's going to be a problem with all the trucks, but they want to make it
Problem
much
with
more
with what?
appealing. Excuse me?
Problem with what?
With all the trucks.
Yeah.
Traffic.
But I would say that at this point, I'd like to see Recology expansion as something that we need. I mean, and they're going in a direction towards trying to eliminate a lot of landfill. So, I'd like to see it expanded. That's just me.
But in this particular sense, we can recommend. That doesn't mean it's a binding agreement there.
Yeah.
What you're looking for is a recommended uses. And if we say that Recology should go at that particular place, for example, it's basically a recommendation. And I don't think that will create any problems between Recology and UPC.
Yeah, if you want to make a long-term it ought to move, I think, you'd ask the question, what are potential places for it to move? there's a couple considerations. One is if you looked at them moving immediately south onto the northern portion of the landfill, that would be one potential location. If they were if they're going to move, that would be one potential location. Potentially then also in the far southerly area, the southerly part of the landfill. I think that would tend to make more sense. It tends to make more sense to keep all those trucks closer to the interchange rather than farther. So those are some of the considerations, and you can look at long-term, this might be ideal. And I think in terms of recommendation, I mean, this is just my recommendation, my notion to you. If you want to say our recommendation is that it should move to the south, I think we can talk to you, have the attorney weigh in on that application is in front of you. But just saying they ought to move may be okay.
Lloyd, if I could, maybe you want to go to your table of sort of the combination of uses.
Yeah. Big table, okay.
One back.
Oh, the other two, okay.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry, where you actually combine
Yep.
the mixed use and what constituted mixed industrial and what
Yeah.
individual land uses.
Here we are.
So, I mean, the part of this is, for example, if there were an area that you were interested in, well, if Recology were to relocate, this is an area that might make sense, then you could consider looking at that multiple use type of Recology or industrial park. And if you define it, permitted in industrial park, the kind of use that Recology does, then you have an area that allows that as a use as opposed to telling them to locate that.
Right. So, but to be more specific, like, do we expect that it would be feasible for them to build the kind of buildings they're planning on building in Area 2 on the landfill? And if so, then we could consider, making Area 1 and 2 an allowable use should.
But I think the other part will be the overriding consideration will be how to take care of the traffic generated as a result of this, and that will dictate whether it should be closer to the freeway ramp or not, because you're trying to reduce the impact of the surrounding areas. But the other puzzle here is the candlestick development, how that's going to be worked out here, because they are right next to it also.
On the north side.
Yeah.
So one of the ideas of a way that it could be addressed is what John had just suggested. So if you looked at, for example, areas, well, we'll use this one, areas 1 and 2. I'll just use these two as examples. So you could take, for example, what John was just suggesting, looking at area 2, calling that industrial park, which would allow for Recology to move south, or if Recology stayed right where it was, then you'll need to deal with the land use in area 1, but area 2 would become light industrial and R&D. So you can look at it. That's one of the reasons the combinations, or if you wanted to talk about a combination of, and I'm not sure what I would call this, but if Recology would not move, that it would also allow office uses in that same location. So that's why I said we can make combinations.
How many square feet is in land area 2? I mean, how many acres is in area 2? Does anybody have a clue?
I know I put those numbers here. Oh, area 2 is about 80 acres, or 90 acres. Area 2 is actually larger than area 1 even after Geneva is pushed south. So area 2 would include that. Now,
the other condition that will affect here will be the type of soils underneath there. In certain areas where you have the batteries there, all this acidic stuff sitting underneath there, we have to take that into consideration before we designate that as a specific use. And that information, to me, is not that detailed yet, because in order to really figure it out, the extent of the toxic stuff underneath, we have to do what you call the soil profile, where we can designate and draw a contour that this area has this kind of contaminants, this area has that kind of stuff there. Based on that, we can determine that this particular area is not suitable for type of thing we're trying to look at it.
Okay.
And that information is one of the things that probably is not fully explored here.
Okay. Remember, we're dealing at general plan level
Yeah.
as opposed to at specific plan. And this is one of the real differences between general plan and specific plan or site-specific development. What we know is that the soils throughout the site have corrosive characteristics, and they're going to need specific designs for underground pipe. We know that being able to put buildings on top of that landfill is an issue of structural design, and that, remember, on the taller buildings, you've got issues potentially of differential settlement. So they are very, very site-specific design engineering studies, because basically, and I'll just use two examples, the northeast corner of planning area 2 is going to have different soils characteristics than the center, which is going to be very different than the southwestern area. And so the idea of moving from the general plan level to the specific plan to site specific is to identify first at the general plan level, these are the types of uses and intensities that we as a city are willing to look at. Then you, applicant, come back to demonstrate to us that you can feasibly put that there instead of trying to design from the beginning and work back to the general plan.
But I thought this was supposed to be a specific plan, right?
Okay?
No.
There is a specific plan there.
Right, but this is what we're looking at. One, it's not a conceptual plan. It's
No.
a specific plan.
In this case, we're actually following the recommendation you had, which is starting at the general plan level, the concept plans, and that's all we're talking about tonight, is at the concept plan level, what are the general land uses? And the reason that we're not launching right into the specific plan is if you look at these areas and decide that you would like a set of uses that are very different than the specific plan, there's no sense going into the detail of that specific plan. So we start at the general plan level. What are our policies? What are the land uses we're willing to accommodate? Where on the site are we willing to accommodate them? And then it's for the applicant to demonstrate that it can in fact be done, which is what the specific plan does.
One of the critical areas that will be influenced by the type of the soil conditions and all that will be where you have the residential component. And say, for example, we decide that in area number 3, for example, we have the residential element, and it turns out that that's not the case. So in order to make a specific recommendation here, we need that type of information rather than just going through the conceptual and say, let's put it here. But
yeah, and that's the reason that I'm suggesting you don't look at the two areas in the northwest, that you don't say residential goes here, that you would look at potentially a mixed use or other category. But what I'm trying to take you through is general plan level, concept plan level, and the same kind of process that we talked about in terms of remediation. Determine what are the appropriate land uses, then design to those land uses, because that is your policy decision as opposed to the design decision. And you can make recommendations anyway. I'm just trying to lay out.
yeah, and that's why from the very beginning I said that it should have been compared as a conceptual plans, both of them. The result is getting very confusing because the thing is, one is a conceptual plan, the other one was said as a specific plan. Now we're coming back and saying it's not a specific plan.
Hey, now,
And also, the last session we talked about the fiscal impact on all that. That also changes the specific plan totally.
I'll put it this way. You had in the EIR in front of you today, you have on the DSP scenarios, general plan, concept plans, and specific plan. That broad from general to specific. In relation to the CPP scenarios and the renewable energy generation alternative, what you have is only the first most general part, which is the general plan. And so rather than try to compare general plan and specific plan to just general plan level, what I'm suggesting is start with only compare general plan level across the board. And once you have defined at the general plan level, then and only then, as I think you had suggested, deal with specific plan. Because you may, depending on what your suggestion is, you may not even want a specific plan.
So in
discussion.
summary, tonight, we're just talking about the general plan, concept plan level, right?
Exactly.
So because that's across the board for all the scenarios. So may I suggest that we go back to the definition, that chart that John had mentioned earlier, so that we can recall what these multiple use types are?
Yeah.
Because the single use types, I think we're familiar with.
Copy of this?
Of the presentation?
Presentation.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. But we don't have it, so,
It's
No.
not in our package here,
yeah,
so.
Yeah, we haven't printed them ahead of time.
yeah.
Yeah, that will be helpful for all of us, I think.
But in terms of that, then after we discuss this and agree with the way this is presented and understand it, the way that we need to understand it, we can move forward areas 1 through 2 and 3. Because
Yeah.
right now, we're talking about how it affects every area, but we're not talking specifically through. So if we do it the reverse, we actually incorporate it at the same time, and then we're not repeating ourselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so what you can do with these use types is if you said, looking at one area, I can see a mix of office and retail, hotels. I can help you get the right name to it. And this is just, the multiple use types are just suggestions of some of the common ones that planners use. You could actually lay out, like in some of the scenarios, I think the northern half ought to be this, and the area to the south ought to be this, that like specifically along Geneva. It's fine, for a couple hundred feet back from the Geneva extension to have development, and then we'll keep the southerly half adjacent to creek open space. There's those kinds of, and that's all the detail we need. And the idea would be then we can take that, put it together, and actually then, just from your verbal descriptions, create a map that looks like that, and we'd bring that back as part of your ultimate recommendations. But this, I thought, was a way that you could actually look at how do we compare these plans to each other. And
I have another question about area number 1. I don't remember from the DEIR. Was any study done in terms of contamination or remediation needed under the current Recology site, or was that excluded since it was active?
yeah, the Recology site does overlay a portion of the landfill, and so that would require some the landfill closure for that portion of the landfill. So very similar to what you see elsewhere in the landfill. Recology would have to close that portion. Also, there would be probably some contamination inside Recology, but before any approval for any use, they would have to go through their remediation, and they would have to go through the very same process that we've talked about with for UPC in OU1 and OU2. They would have to go through and do their site-specific
Yeah, no, I
studies.
understand the process, but my question was if UPC and Recology suddenly decided that they wanted to swap the Recology down to Section 2, and UPC says, hey, now we're going to build housing on top of Recology, has anyone studied no?
Not for
yeah.
housing,
Okay.
No. The EIR, remember, in all of the scenarios, and in fact, all of the alternatives, is based on the existing Recology facility remaining in place, and in some of those scenarios, it expands.
Right. Okay.
And if I could, again, what Lloyd also pointed out, that if the Planning Commission's sort of land use recommendation is different from what was evaluated in the EIR, again, that's sort of a adjunct to your recommendation to the council. You recommending this sort of general plan land use pattern, understanding that would trigger a higher level or different level of environmental review. That's, again, a recommendation you can make to the council if that's ultimately where you want to head.
Lloyd, I have one more question. Isn't it the agencies like Water Quality Board and the agencies that are looking at the soil contaminations and all that, wouldn't they be the one that dictate the type of use that will be there?
No.
Because,
No, remember, the process is, in terms of site remediation, OU1, OU2 would work the same on the recology site off the landfill, is, and this is what Dr. Mearns had pointed out, the city determines what are the appropriate land uses. Then the human health risk assessment is done to determine what remediation is required to meet the standards for the use that you as a city have determined. And I think one of the concerns that you had raised was, what if it's not possible to get to that level of remediation? But the process on remediation starts with what is the land use, and remember, all the risks, human health risks, are based on what is the land use and what are the exposures for that land use. So it starts with your determination of what is appropriate land use.
okay, thanks.
Could you clarify again the area and sizes? Because I know we had it somewhere, but I just can't recall right now. You said area 2 was 90 acres.
I thought I had that. Okay. Area 1 really depends on where recology or where Geneva ends up, but you have Area 1 is with Geneva pushed farther south is about 80 acres. Area, I'll go these one by one. Area 2, about 110 acres. Okay, he's going to. Area 3, about 80 acres. Area 4, which is the industrial park, about 20. Area 5, just about 60, 70 acres. And Area 6, about 60 or so.
Thank
So
you.
they are all fairly large areas and
And before you said. was
substantial
20
blocks to
acres?
deal with.
20, yeah.
And numbers 6?
5 was 70, and area 6 was 60.
Yeah.
6.
So that area is actually larger than what Tim had talked about last time, is 600 developable acres, because, one, we've added the existing recology site to what Kaiser Marston had talked about last time, as well as including, for example, in Area 3 in the southeasterly part, that central open space, and so a little bit more acreage than you talked about at your last meeting. And what we will get to is at your next meeting, when we talk about intensity of land use, we'll be able, based on the size of these areas, to calculate based on different types of densities and types of intensities, how many square feet approximately could be built within the entire site.
Also, the alignment of the Geneva is still up in the air, right? I mean, it's not it's not decided yet.
The specific alignment of Geneva has not been determined. I think that is more, it's partly to accommodate potential expansion of recology, but also the length of roadway that it takes to get up and over the rail line, and the grades coming up and down. So if you push the road farther south, the grades are shallower. And what I would suggest to the commission as a means of approaching that is think of the Geneva extension as its alignment being an engineering issue rather than trying to make a recommendation, this is what the alignment ought to be, because once it's engineered, as you know, it can move.
Yeah, well, that's okay, but I was looking at the total acreage for 1 or 2 will change.
They will change.
And also the
Yeah.
6, depending on where the alignment will be.
As well as 5 and 6.
Yeah.
So even though this was drawn based on the bi-county corridor alignment, I think maybe as your working assumption, we might work, and I'll get you acreages when we get to intensity based on recology, based on Geneva being pushed south. I think that from City Public Works is their preferred alignment, pushing it south, regardless of what happens on recology.
And we also don't know whether it's going to be overpass or underpass, right, underneath the Caltrain. So that will also determine
At Caltrain or the freeway?
freeway, the
Freeway, yes, they're two different designs
designs also. So that will affect the whole area there also in terms of,
I wouldn't expect it to have a big change in the gross acreage. I mean, there'll be changes to the boundaries, and there'll be some relatively minimal differences for right-of-way requirements, but I wouldn't think they're going to appreciably change the order of magnitude of kind of the level of planning you're doing here.
yeah. And the reason I was asking is it can affect the circulation of traffic there if it's underpass or overpass, and where you're going to put the roads and all that, depending on the type of use you have here.
What it will also affect is depending on the grades and how it fits, it will really affect connection points of these planning areas and designing the roadways and getting intersections closely spaced or farther apart. And again, I would suggest, so that's why those are the specific plan level design issues.
Yeah, but the concern I had was if you say, for example, if you give it a industrial area very close to Geneva and there is no connection point, it's decided that should go underpass or overpass, then you have to change that location of that in certain way.
Now, you could actually, I would think of it this way also, even depending on the access points for Area 2, if you would decide that access points, I think one access point at a minimum to Geneva is reasonable. I think the question is when you start getting to 2 or 3 access points and they get closely spaced. But you would also have the ability to, or potential for extending Sierra Point Parkway all the way up to the interchange and accessing off that roadway extension.
The main concern here was a truck traffic,
Yeah.
And if you have the ecology there, you're talking about number of trucks over there too. And if you're going to put another industrial area there, then it's going to have more impact on them.
Exactly, and as you start thinking of industrial park and light industrial or other uses, just the presence of trucks is something to think about under any circumstances, let alone how many.
Yeah, because they are adjacent to the housing on Sledge also, so that's another concern, that the mixed traffic here.
Exactly. So.
Okay. Thanks for the copies of this.
So if you'd like to, we could start with Area 1. And this is the area where recology is now, and you can see on the slide the various plans and what are proposed for each one. Every one of the plans recognizes the existing recology use, and the real issue is what happens in the areas, the differences between the plans, what happens between existing recology and Geneva.
I've got another question about the map.
Which map?
The, just all of them. North of Ice House Hill, you have an area labeled Potential Development Area, and I presume that's Industrial Way. I'm wondering, does the Daylighted Creek cut through the current Industrial Way, or is that white line the current alignment of the road?
Let's see. The area you see between the two white shaded areas that defines Industrial Way, so would be the Daylighted Creek that will cut through the northern portion of that.
So the Daylighted Creek does cut through the existing Industrial Way?
It has to get out of the site somewhere.
Right.
Yeah. And we can talk about that area because there are some access issues, obviously, to that area when we get to, that would be number 4.
One thing we could do is recology / light industrial. Where exactly is the, on this map is the Caltrains? I'm getting confused. Caltrains is.
So currently DSP and DSP 5 is business. And then you go to CPP, and that's mixed use. You go to CP5, that's industrial. And you go to renewable energy, that's industrial as well. If you're looking at the potential uses for, via this chart. We're talking multiple uses, not single use type.
Now, the Caltrain station, would it be on the north of Geneva Extension or the south?
We don't know yet.
It's north.
North, okay.
Yeah, and some of the discussions have been that you saw in EIR comments, San Francisco wanting to move the Bayshore Station all the way into San Francisco, up onto the Schlag Lock site, potential for moving it south so that Caltrain would be right at Geneva, and you could actually have a BRT stop at the same place as a Caltrain station. And the area shown here as the transit area is based on its existing location or moving it just a couple hundred feet.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just lay out some options to kind of help. One would be to identify the existing recology site as recology, which is consistent with every scenario and plan there that is in front of you. The area between recology and Geneva, if you called it business park, would allow for office and retail uses, and would then say if recology proposes, comes back to you with a proposal to expand and actually somehow got control of that land, recology would just come back with an amendment to that designation. Or you could go with a industrial park kind of designation that would allow it to expand without any amendment. But at this point, all of the scenarios recognize the existing recology use. It's really the area between recology and Geneva that's where the discussion.
So recology is considered as an industrial zoning, right?
Recology is more of an industrial use, I would
So if you designate Area 1 as all industrial, that will include recology also, right?
Yeah, if you took the whole thing and called it industrial park, I mean, that would include recology and light industrial uses to the south. The question there is, what do you want along the Geneva frontage as people are entering your community, coming off the freeway?
But wouldn't that be determined by the extent of how much they want to enlarge their facility, their ecology? They may be able to use the entire Area 1.
Exactly, yeah. If they wanted to expand, they would be using the entirety of Area 1 and probably looking to push that alignment farther south.
So if you go for ecology, then do we have to put a restriction? Because in case if you're saying ecology as well as industrial park, and so how are we going to divide those two? Because if ecology has a potential to take the whole thing.
Yeah, I think if you wanted to use the industrial park category, you could just call that entire area industrial park, because that way you've addressed what happens if recology does not expand. It would be light industrial uses. If you went with a business park designation, that would be allow for the office and retail uses along Geneva if recology did not expand. If you ultimately, with a recology hearing, decided to agree to the expansion, they would be coming back saying, you know, we would like that part of all recology. Those are kind of, it falls into, your options are kind of fall into three categories that way.
So if you leave it as an industrial, then it gives it a little bit more flexibility in terms of ecology versus the other industrial use.
Correct.
But then do we want to have, when people come off the freeway, do we want to have retail or office there? Or potential? Because that's the proposal here,
Which proposal?
the DSPs. The business park includes the retail and office options. Because this is just a potential, what can be there. We're not saying, we're not getting into specifics yet.
But DSP's proposal is only business park, it doesn't recognize the ecology, right? Business park will not
That's right.
include ecology.
That's right.
Correct. And remember also in the DSP scenario, their business park designation, because in the DSP scenario, ecology is not a part. So really, probably the better way to have said that would have been recology / business park. Because recology is,
It's
in
there.
all of these, recology is a recology.
It's already there, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not identified in your
Yeah,
the chart.
we took that from what is in the actual DSP plan.
Now, the CPP also had another R&D area too, research and development.
Right, so they had a block for research and development, a hotel site, as well as the recology site. And
Hotel
so-
next to the ecology?
Oh, why not?
I'm sorry?
They're proposing hotel next to the ecology.
Hey, they want a museum at the Ecology Center.
Exactly, so that's why you start thinking about how these fit together.
Interesting.
It is 80 acres, though. So it's pretty big.
I kind of lean towards designating as an industrial park that will cover ecology as well as other industrial uses. But I
think-
don't know about that.
I think we could have it both ways. We could have it industrial use or offices.
Industrial / business park.
I don't see why not.
Again, these categories that Lloyd has suggested are really sort of just to start the discussion. These aren't hard and fast. The commission, you know, if you have a certain range of uses that you consider appropriate, you know, that's really, you can articulate that and Lloyd can come back with sort of categories that then encompass that. I wouldn't get hung up on the words of whether it's a business park or industrial park. I think it's the idea of what range of uses are you really looking at.
I'm looking at the industrial park as anything that's related to tooling and machining and ecology and all that. So if you're going to put the businesses right next to the ecology facility, I don't know how that's going to fly. So I'm just wondering that.
They're supposed to be under buildings now.
No, but
With lots of trucks.
well, ecology is going to be expanding also. So if you're going to do that and you're going to put a business there, I don't know how many business will be interested in locating that location right next to the ecology. So industrial use will be a better use, at my opinion, but I don't know the others.
I'm
Oh,
fine
I
with
agree.
that. I don't know about anyone else.
How does that?
Yeah, no, I agree that industrial is best for that area. You know, maybe additional freight forwarding or something might fit in there.
And that will satisfy the renewable energy concerns, the ecology, they want ecology only, so. So are we in agreement on the
Yeah.
number one?
We agree on that.
Okay,
So industrial?
yeah. Being an old age, I'd like to get a little break. If it's possible to go to the
5 minutes, is that all right?
5 minutes less.
5 minutes?
Sure.